So here we have a really interesting example of this bizarre scalloping, and it's sort of finger shaped scalloping here. 1, 2, 3, but it's not quite fingers that are doing it, it seems, because then it comes up and it comes to a V right there. A finger wouldn't leave a V, right? It could, but it doesn't seem quite like a finger. But these are finger-shaped valleys everywhere you look in this. This is just a particularly clear example of it. You can see the silhouette of these scalloped ridges, and the ridges alongside the valleys are very sharp. Very, very, very sharp. You can almost cut yourself on how sharp they are. I mean, this material is really hard. This is material in the hills above the Adriatic Sea in Rijeka, Croatia. And this is really incredible material here that composes this hill and composes all the hills around here. It's the same material. And it's exactly the same material as we find in the hill country in Texas, centering around Kerrville, Texas. Exactly the same. I've spent a lot of time there, many days looking at that geology, and this is the exact same geology as in Kerrville, Texas. And you see this always in Kerrville. You see all this scalloping, these interesting sort of finger-sized valleys with these sharp ridges next to them, and they're always going up, almost always going up, as if some organism were crawling up, and then some worm, when it was soft, crawled up. And you say, well, if it was an organism that made those, if this was naturally formed material, perhaps, under the ocean, in the water, or in the soft mud next to the ocean, or in a lake bed, or next to the lake bed where it's soft, then you wouldn't have these hard, really solidly sharp and hard ridges, because the material would have been soft enough that it wouldn't have suddenly hardened to this ridge overnight. All of them wouldn't have just suddenly hardened to a sharp ridge. It wouldn't have made sense. They would have been softened over time if they were going to harden naturally. And so you have to wonder how they stayed so sharp, And then you start to think, well, maybe this isn't naturally formed material after all. Maybe this material is laid down. And then you ask yourself more questions. You say, well, why do we find channels? In other words, why do we find sections in the material? Like this. And you say, oh, well, it broke apart over the years, or really broke apart? Or, so there's one section. So there's on the left, and then on the right you see it sort of channeled and all the way down. And then here, another channel. It doesn't look like it broke apart, because we find the same worm-like, finger-like channeling ridging on this and on this. In other words, it's not like this broke off of this. This was channeled with these finger marks, whatever you want to call them, and so was this. So these were apart for thousands or millions of years. Why is there a channel here? Why does the channel go all the way there? Everywhere you look, there's sections, and it's the same way in Bosnia, it's the same way in South Africa. You see them building in sections. And the sections usually, the sections in Bosnia and South Africa that I've seen always have smooth sides. Now these are not smooth, but they are rather regular, aren't they? I mean, they're not perfectly smooth, but they're pretty regular, right? Pretty regular. And you see that channel there, pretty regular. But then we see regular in the sense of the same width. And then you see this channel here, much wider, rather regular. There's a channel there, much wider, rather regular. Everywhere you see channels, sections. So we keep asking ourselves questions, because the orthodoxy, the scientific orthodoxy. Geologists, archaeologists, and anthropologists would come here and say, well, this is seabed material that's been grooved by worms, and then the holes, the official statement on the holes is that these holes have been made by fungi. Over time, water pulls up, it feeds it moistens the fungi, and the fungi eats through these. And there are ways to show that that's complete nonsense, and I'm going to do another video on that soon. But you see these holes all over the place. Let me just show that it's complete nonsense by one line of reasoning, and then there are 5 other lines of reasoning where we can show that the orthodox view is total gibberish. Okay, this is said to be created by fungi. In other words, these holes were eaten away slowly over time. That's the orthodox view. But we see this ridging. You see the channeling of these huge, almost like a huge finger came here, and a huge finger came here and left this really sharp ridge. Well, the fungi isn't leaving a sharp ridge, it's not leaving a valley along the edge of its thing that it's eating away. If it's eating away a circular-ish, a roundish area, because water's pooling in sort of a roundish way and slowly being eaten down in sort of a roundish way, left, right, a little bit, whatever, then it's not leaving these finger marks, right? It doesn't make sense. This looks like, if you really look at it, if you take time to look at it and use your brain and your eyes together, it's a rare thing in science, but it should be the rule in science, but scientists don't seem to do that. They just take the orthodoxical view, which is total nonsense on the face of it, and say, ah, fungi ate through this, or water erosion. Water erosion, really? Water erosion. Water erosion. But then all you have to do is find a place that should have water erosion but doesn't. I mean, if water is pooling and then sort of eating through the rock little by little, eroding through, then all you have to do is find a place where if there's a valley in the rock that doesn't have a hole. And that's evidence against the theory. And there's lots of places like that. Here's a place right here. This is lower than the surrounding area. There's no hole there. Everywhere you look, there's evidence against the orthodoxical view. So then we have to ask ourselves, if this wasn't formed naturally, and then again, also, if the exact similar geology in the Kerrville, Texas area, in the hill country as they call it, in Texas, wasn't formed naturally, then who formed it? Who laid it down in sections? Is the question. Now here's a interesting thing. Now this is really hard material, but you see that this has broken off. Oop. In fact, I'm going to take this as a sample, but you can see that this fits perfectly, right? Really hard material, super, but this has broken off for some reason, okay? It looks like this is where people come across, and maybe it was disturbed by somebody coming across, but I mean, the chances of getting a sample off of this really, really, really hard concrete material is really close to 0. So this is really a good find, and I'm going to take this sample and I'm going to get it analyzed, find out what it is. And I'm not going to tell them where it's from, what it should be. I'm just going to ask them what it is. But you can see for yourself that it's a crystalline material. And you say, well, that's interesting. Crystalline material, okay. Nature's awesome. Well, what is nature? Was Earth terraformed? So many questions that need answers. And what we need is people to ask the questions, you know. We need the people to ask the questions and not just sit in a class in the halls of academia and write down what the persons posing as the knowledge keepers say. If you take archaeology, or geology. You might come across a class that talks about Mima mounds, and your professor will talk about how gophers created Mima mounds, M-I-M-A, mounds, hundreds of millions of which exist in the world. Now, most of them in America, in North America, were bulldozed for development, so they don't exist anymore. But there are preserved areas where some Mima mounds still exist, but there were millions of them on the North American continent before development occurred. And there are hundreds of millions of them all over the world. Many of them are in Africa. So your professor, you'll be paying money to your expert, your professor, to tell you the following. Gophers created Mima mounds. And you say, okay, let me write that down. Gophers, Mima mounds. And then you go home, and if anybody ever asks you, you say, yeah, gophers. Oh, those gophers. They don't tell you how. They don't say how they got the material. The Mima mounds, if you take a cross-section of the Mima mounds, if you take a backhoe and dig down, and then to the bottom of the Mima mound, and then further, you find out that the soil of the Mima mounds is sitting, the rich, loamy soil, is sitting on a substrate of a glacial rock. And then soil came in slowly after the melting of the land ice on the North American continent. I'm just talking about North America right now. So then you say, well, but how did the gophers get the material to make the mounds? It's just hard rock that no gopher could get one grain of sand from, right? And then the mound. Where are they digging all this earth up to get the mound from? There is no earth. It's just a rock. And you have a Mima mound and then another Mima mound, and they connect to each other and they go for miles and miles. It's just Mima mounds. It's not like Mima mounds on top of some earth. It's just Mima mounds, and there's not layers, and it's not turbulent, it's not chaotic as a gopher mound would be. There's no, sort of modeling on the top. It's a nice, smooth, rounded surface, roundish from the top. The next one's nice and smooth and rounded. You never see that in nature. Gophers are always creating these really chaotic surfaces to a more smooth, natural, landscape. And so none of these issues are brought up by the scientific orthodoxy. Academia will simply tell you the most clownish thing possible about Mima mounds with a straight face. And there's no analogy to explain how absurd it is, because it's so absurd that there's nothing as absurd as that. The only way you could really help to explain how clownish it is to put a clown costume on the professor. You need a clown costume, full clown costume, the whole thing, and the makeup and the hair and the big feet. Then he says Mima mounds were made by gophers. And then you cut to the kids writing it down. Very serious face on the clown and the students. Oh, Mima mounds were made by gophers. Now, once we realize that this is absolute bollocks, absolute nonsense, okay, then we say, well, what did make the Mima mounds all over the world? What are creating these wave-like patterns across the earth? And if it was done artificially by some intelligence, by some species, why did they do it? Why did they put that much work into creating these mounds? Were skeletons found in the mounds? No. Was gold found in the mounds? Any kind of treasure, silver, anything besides loamy, rich, homogeneous soil? No. Just soil. Beautiful, dark soil. But it stayed a mound. The rain didn't come and pummel it flat as it should have. If we had done this across the land, the rain would have just washed them down, and it would have eventually been flat after a few thousand years, or maybe even after 1,000 years or 500 years. The rain would have just made all of them flat. But somehow they were created in a way, whether artificially or naturally, to let them survive over millennia, many millennia. How? How did they do that? And what was the purpose? Were these an energetic, were they meant to mitigate Earth energy? And if so, for what purpose? Who did it and why? These are the questions that we need to ask because the universities don't ask them. The universities are the closed, narrowed, non-critical bastions of old knowledge. New knowledge, which is what the universities should encourage. The universities should be the place where the newest ideas are bantered about and looked at, and that it's an exciting place for new knowledge to get tested. New knowledge is simply discarded before it's even considered. It's not considered. Only the old knowledge, which is the clown-faced, serious, yes, the pyramids are tombs for kings, write that down. Oh, really? I mean, it's absurd. So let's use the clown professor image to let us know immediately, instantly, that academia is brimming with nonsense. It is a clown factory because the professors create more clowns, and those are the people that go out and talk about the pyramids as tombs for kings, and Mima mounds is made by gophers. Once we instantly, without image, dismiss the old way, the old knowledge, the artificial knowledge, the knowledge that is meant to suppress the truth, then we can instantly, in the next moment, have courage to explore reality, to look at material and say, is that really made by worms and erosion? Is this sectioning due to tectonic uplift, as they'll tell us? Some kind of chaotic earthquake energy or tectonic energy? Or is it something else? And all we have to do is use our eyes. In other words, if we can just get rid of this reverence for the academic viewpoint by seeing that they're clowns with big wigs, colorful wigs, and big clown shoes, then we can instantly take a deep breath and go, oh, it's up to us to use our eyes and our brains together to determine what we think might be true and to test hypotheses. And that's what science is. Science is absolutely banned from the universities. Science is banned from the universities, except the science that gives us the trivial answers. That, just like Wikipedia, gives us the trivial truth. If you want to know what hummingbird might be in your yard, Wikipedia. If you want to know the truth about our past, banned from Wikipedia, banned from the universities. This is Jock Doubleday reporting from Rijeka, Croatia on January 5th, 2017. I hope you all have a scientific day and that you take heart in the fact that you are the scientist, that you are the new professors who can take your scientific research to others who might want to learn something about our past and who might want to therefore have a foundation for the future.